What's going on, Dragons? Happy Friday, and welcome to episode 25 of the ErCast, your weekly Friday Night Magic pre-show. I'm your co-host, Cory, and fresh off his Disney dream vacation, joining us this week is Cole.
Your boy's engaged. It's true. But we just got back from Disney and had a super fun time. Joining us this week, we have a special surprise, but I'm here right next to the other half of Love and Mana, Erika.
Hello, everyone. So excited to be here this week. And yes, very much so engaged and excited. Whoop, whoop.
Also joining us this week, she wastes your wild cards on meme decks so you don't have to. You know her, you love her. We have Ash from the eMpTyG YouTube channel in the house.
Hello. And also congrats. I didn't know you got engaged like recently, so that's exciting.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ash.
Yes, thank you.
And thanks for joining us this week for this episode of the ErCast. This is going to be super fun. Yeah. And this is super special because we've never had two guests before. This is a historic episode.
Got to balance it. Put those hosting skills to the test.
It's exhausting. I'm already exhausted because it's a very important day. That is March 8th as of this airing, which is International Women's Day. So we thought we would bring two ladies on so that Cole and I could mansplain to them what it is like to be a female in the magic sphere. Now, just so we're clear, when I say female in the magic sphere, what that means is the card game Magic the Gathering, as released by Wizards of the Coast, et cetera, et cetera.
Yes, women love being called female and male-dominated species.
Yes, exactly, 100%.
It's green flags all around.
How do you think I got married? It's with smooth talking skills like that. Hey, you female, come here and learn about my card game.
Are you rocking a fedora?
A fedora. It was all goatee, soul patch, and ponytail. It was a beautiful look. Really,
he made it work.
Yeah.
I always make it work. So all seriousness aside, or all joking aside, I guess, all seriousness up front, I think Cole and I are going to take a little bit of a back seat on this episode because we want to spend some time looking at really what it takes to go through, like Ash said, in a male-dominated arena for a game that really should be accessible for everybody in every space. I mean, the Gathering is for everybody, which is hopefully a phrase that's just catching on a little more and more recently. So I guess let's start it off. How did you both get into Magic?
Okay, I was like, who's first?
It's a real coin flip scenario.
Yeah. I actually got into it when I was really little. I don't really count it as me playing Magic. I just was mostly collecting them and then kind of playing made up rules with my brother because, we grew up in the Washington area where the game started. So I think it was like my brother's friend knew someone who had worked on like the original team that had done like the alpha and beta cards or something like that, and really wanted my brother's friend to get into Magic. So we got a ton of like those old cards that my mom sadly threw away, So I used to have a bunch of bayous and all those kind of things. But later on, moved out, didn't have money to invest in the game or really didn't play it that much. I just kind of fell off of it. And then during the pandemic, my brother was like, hey, download Arena. It's free. Just like get back into it. So I was like, all right. And I was like, oh my God, I forgot how much like joy this brought me. And then even to see like some of the OG cards that I had like as a kid growing up in like Arena, and like I was like, oh yeah, I remember this card. It was so cool. And just like bringing that moment back. And after that, I was just like totally lost in the game again. I was like about a month before Strixhaven dropped, which feels like forever ago now.
Wow.
But
and easily the best set of recent memory. Maybe. No?
I thought it was fun. Had some good mechanics.
Imagawa was really fun. The Neon Dynasty one.
No, none of them had Brina the Demigod, which means I can't finesse the table with anything. But
Politics.
Politics, definitely. Wow, that is really incredible that you were able to see those cards at such a young age and like be able to have such a direct connection to some of the creators of Magic. That's really cool.
Oh yeah, I didn't know them at all. No. It was just my brother's friend.
Right.
You weren't like personal friends with Richard Garfield or anything like that?
No. I was just a little elementary school kid going, I like these monsters. They look cool. And then collected them. So
that sounds a lot like me playing Pokemon back in the day, where it was just like, No, I like Pikachu. I don't know how this game is played, but this is the card I
Yeah,
like,
This is
and I'll make my own
solid.
rules.
Yeah.
I actually have some of my childhood Pokemon cards right behind me. Didn't know how to play, but I collected them.
See, that's
That
all,
is
what it's all
fun. That
about.
is incredible.
The way you play is you put them unsleeved onto the concrete, playground outside your
Oh,
school,
yes.
and then you forcefully scrape them around, and you get some dust, Cheeto dust on there. That's how you play with
yeah.
them. You make them, well played.
Build card houses with them.
What about you, Erica? I know you got in a little more recently than Alpha and Beta.
Absolutely, yeah. So recently, Cole has been playing for quite some time, and we've been dating for 8 years. And he actually did try to get me into Magic about 2 years after we started dating, and we did play. We played a couple of games. We played Standard, we played Commander. He really kind of tried everything. And I was not as into it as I think he had hoped initially.
You can say that again.
And then after a couple of years, he did get me my first deck at a Command Fest that he had gone to. And it was Faldorn, the Dreadwolf Herald. And I was like, well, he spent the money on it. He got me the sleeves. He got me the deck box. The least I can do is really give it a try. And he showed me all the rules, and we played 1,000,001 1v1s, and loved it. Absolutely loved it. And that was about 2 years ago. So I've been playing consistently Commander for about 2 years.
So this is like confirmation that like pity pays off, right, Cole?
The secret is, just approach again 4 to 5 years after the initial eMpTyG rejection. But it was all about the sleeves were orange. Her favorite color is orange. The deck box was made out of recycled materials, not the plug. I forget what they're called. But,
It's the Return to Earth.
and she's a very sustainable girl. So if you weren't encouraged by the cards themselves, it's the accoutrements that kind of like lure you in. The dice, the matching dice, the playmats.
Yeah, he did really good, actually.
What's funny is that's kind of the same as Sharon, my wife. So we tried to do Commander like when I first got back into Commander, and it was just not working out for her. So we tried to do Modern. Well, Modern in quotes. I got 60 card decks of just what I thought would be simple, cool stuff, and then she took to that, and then ended up transitioning into Commander. But it did take, I think, a couple years. Like she tried Commander, and then she was like, absolutely not for me, and now she routinely defeats me in Commander in a very humbling, not embarrassing way.
Yeah, Sharon's pretty cutthroat. She's one of the most competitive people I've ever played any game with. I love it.
So to turn it back into, I guess the male-dominated space a little bit. So you're both experienced at different levels of kind of getting into the creator space of Magic. I know Ash does a little more Twitch streaming and more arena play and stuff like that. Erica, you do most of your content creation on Instagram. But why do you think it's more male dominated or more considered to be male dominated?
Yeah.
You want to go first?
Yeah. So
You trample over each other. It's part of Magic. Magic has trampling. Just interject as you feel.
So Cole and I were talking about that the other day, actually, recently, and how when Magic was first starting out, it was incredibly popular, and it really hit really well with the masses, and how people were actually getting a lot of like baseball cards before they were doing the collector baseball cards. And then, so my opinion is basically that card collecting in general has always kind of been more male dominated. There's not really that I can think of a version that would be like a Barbie or like a doll or anything like that, where it's like collecting cards. So I think that the idea of collecting cards in general has always been generally male dominated. And over time, I do think that it has just I don't know, like it just seems to be more so the case in that regards. But I think it's changing now more than anything. I think it's changing now because it's a lot more accessible, it's a lot more widespread, worldwide spread. And so I do think that it's changing up, but I'm not entirely sure. I feel like I'm very new to the sphere, and my assumptions would be that it's just generally a for males, I guess.
Kind of leans as more of like the quote unquote like boys collect cards and girls collect Barbies kind of thing.
Yes, that's precisely what I was trying to get at. Correct. Yeah.
Well,
Boy, it's time for me to bring out my gender psychology
Time
class.
to crack it open.
Sorry, I felt like I cut you off when you were gonna.
No,
say stuff.
you're good.
Okay.
You cut me off. Listen, my voice rambles enough as it is.
I also ramble, so I'm sorry.
You're totally great. I think a big part of it, if you look at it historically, it was never a space created for a woman to feel like they were allowed to be involved. If you look at some of the earlier 90s commercials, a lot of them are like, go be a pro. And it's like a white man with women in bikinis standing around him. And like, if you look at the card art itself, I actually did a little skit on this. If you look at the card Hero of Bladehold, she's in a bikini armor thing. Her tits are out. If you look at a lot of earlier art, a lot of it's very much for the male gaze. But also, if you look at the demographic that's being invited into those spaces, was again predominantly like a white male space. So how do you bring in diversity and people feeling like they can go in person to a space that is going to be full of people that's not really going to be necessarily welcoming to you, or catering the space to you to feel like you are someone who feels safe? And so I'm a queer woman, and I've always been very kind of drawn towards what would be traditionally considered masculine. But I think when we're looking at things like Barbie in pink or anything like that, that's considered like social conditioning for gender norms. And what are those gender norms kind of stemming from, and what are like those audience being like attracted in, to being drawn towards like a game. And I think like when you step back, like especially in the 90s, like you watched like 90s commercials with like kids toys and stuff, like how they catered the advertising for that was incredibly different between like things that were considered like women toys or more masculine toys. And a lot of like masculine toys were like ones that kind of encouraged engineering or using certain like critical thinking skills in a way that would encourage them to have the ability to go into those kind of spaces and utilize those skills. Where if you look a lot of like 90s commercials with like women's toys or female like catered like feminine traits, it was like, here's a baby that poops, like, you know what I mean? So if you think about like just those spaces and gaming and entertainment itself, it's so vastly different in what is encouraged in masculine traits versus feminine traits. And so when you look at a bigger spectrum of, okay, we have a game, right? And if you think about gaming again in the 90s, early 2000s, 100% geared towards the masculine gaze. It's, if you look at the way that like women characters were designed in games, 100% for the masculine gaze. And then there's very few characters you can think of from an entertainment standpoint, from a gaming standpoint, where how were women written? Were they crying about a man? Were they arguing over a man? Were they putting themselves down? Were they given leadership roles that didn't involve being as violent as a man to prove that they belong in that space? And so when you look at those kind of pieces of social conditioning and over the grand spectrum of how long Magic's existed, it's an old game. So it came from this era of these social norms that we as a society are trying to evolve and be more open-minded with, especially when we look at queer communities, like the trans community. Like when you think about like the impact of what represents just gender as a whole, there's so many different identities you have to take into like consideration there. And so that's just from like a space, like just from like a subconscious space of like bringing in diversity there. But then you also have to think about how are the people in that space that already own that space, how will they receive new people or what they perceive as new people that were previously not necessarily catered to feeling like they can be there. How do they adapt to it? And so a good example for me is like I would play Call of Duty a lot with my brother, and we old school Call of Duty would be like, um, you would be in a private group chat and then you'd go into an open lobby, and sometimes you didn't have a chance to like mute your mic in that open lobby before someone heard your voice. And the amount of times I got called so many terrible things like was insane. So I got pretty much like conditioned early for like being in these kind of gaming spaces that I wasn't welcomed, I would be threatened, and I needed to have masculine presence around me to kind of, quote, protect me from these other people that are trying to make me not feel welcomed. And so I think like what's been really interesting over the space, of a couple of decades at this point is I think Wizards and Magic has trying to really change that focus, not just to make it feel more welcomed and safe for people, like women, but like, everyone, like the queer
Sure.
community, the BIPOC community, and all that. And that can be done through representation of just feeling seen. Like if I can't even express the first time I saw an openly gay character that was represented in a positive way on the media. And now we have that in our Magic cards, right? And that's so cool because it's like, that's me. I see myself in that. And if I see myself represented in a game, then that means I feel like there's a space for me. And it makes it feel like the gathering part applies to everyone, which I think is what really needs to be taken into consideration. But all of that comes from, this slow kind of shift, both from the company marketing and the card designs to just the community itself being more accepting of people that are, different. You don't have to understand, you don't have to know them, but you have to learn how to exist in a space with people that have, differences from you. And I think that's what makes Magic such a unique space because it forces that, especially if you aren't playing Arena, if you're playing Commander or any of that, you have to exist with people who are different if you want to play the game. So I know, sorry, I rambled a lot there.
No,
No,
you're
that
good.
was so well said. I am so glad I went first because I don't think I could have followed that. That was beautiful.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, no. I think it's a good, and they're valid points too, right? Because I think if you look back, you're talking about 80s, 90s, early 2000s, especially stuff that shaped. I'll say my generation. I'm not going to speak for you guys, but I'm a millennial, so it definitely those commercials came out when I was a kid. But I mean, talking about like the video game space, for example, I don't know how accurate this is, but I recall hearing a story about when Nintendo was first launched, when they first came to the US with a console. Well, they didn't really have dedicated electronics sections in toy stores because there was no video game industry at the time. So they had to, at that point, make a decision of, is this going to be a quote unquote boys toy or a quote unquote girls toy? And for whatever reason, because I'm sure somebody crunched the numbers or something and just said, oh, maybe there's 52% more boys than girls or something, but they decided to put it down on that specific aisle. And now you're 40 years into having a video game industry that is, like quote unquote the boys club of where I would say even just now in the most recent years, do you start to see more games shift towards like female demographics or things where they're even accounting for it? I remember not 5-10 years ago where people were like, oh, I'm shocked to find out that women play games, and the mobile game industry has built their bread and butter off the fact that women tend to play more mobile games and stuff like that than men. But there's always that mindset of like, oh, we're going to be a bunch of neckbeards in Call of Duty lobbies, and we can get away with it because it's all the bros and one female playing. I guess my question would be, someone growing up in that, where do you think the role is on the company versus the community kind of self pruning those people out? Because the company ideally sets metrics for how what they want their environment to be, but they're always going to be kind of money first for better or worse, whereas the community that's out there doing Call of Duty, frankly, someone should have raised those people better and reach through a mic and slap them. So I guess my question is, where do you think that balance should be between company versus community and the governance?
So
Actually, have the perfect background experience for it, but go for
there
it.
we go.
You first.
I was gonna say, let me go first, please. Yes. So I think that no, maybe you should go first. Actually, let me collect my thoughts.
I know it was a long-winded one.
No, you're good.
I actually used to do content moderation for a major gaming service, and I was doing a lot of investigations from all sorts of spectrums of evil online activities, but some of it was harassment. So, in those spaces, it is very difficult as a company if you're thinking about like what are you doing in that space. So, if you're creating an online game, you can look at like Blizzard, Xbox, PlayStation moderation services, right? They have code of conduct guidelines where if you're a jerk and you do bad things, you get banned. But to a certain extent, like you can only do so much. Like kids can lie about how old they are to get a game. People can just, if there's a space where you can send like messages to people, like that's all going to have to be like moderated. And I know some people joke around being like, oh, I wish Arena had like chat so you could talk to your opponent. And I'm like, oh my God, that would be the most toxic thing. Cause like, just the being anonymous aspect of it and not having like real world tangible consequences tied to it. Like the amount of people who would get spent insane amount of monies like on product and then just getting their account banned because they just wanted to be a jerk but then didn't care and they would just keep being a jerk. So I think from a company's standpoint, it kind of comes down to a couple of different things, like what kind of product or services are they providing? Is it just a game that's an MMO game? Is it an RPG? Is it something that involves people interacting with each other? And then to a certain extent within that design that you're developing, what is that interaction like? Is it just emoting at each other? Is it allowing like voice chat and all of that? So there's just so much in that space that companies have to keep in mind when they're designing. How do you make this game safe for people, or at least have some level of like a reporting service where people can be held accountable to a certain extent? But there's always going to be that difficult factor because you have like doxing and all those other kind of things that happen too. When you're thinking about it from like a marketing standpoint, you have to consider like what about this game that you're trying to like attract your audience with? Like, is it like, oh, it's a first person shooter, so we want like it's going to be more violent? But if you look at like a lot of more modern day like designs, there's usually like a representation of different kinds of people. There's still that like predominant, I can't remember which YouTube creator pointed it out, but if you look at like the first 20 years of gaming, she's like, look, white man with a gun frowning or scowling. And then if you look at like the evolution of like how those covers are designed, it's changed a little. And I think like again, if you look at like Cyberpunk or other things, like the character designs for like different assets, they had like a woman front facing for one, there's a man front facing for a different asset, and it's like shifting. So I think like having diversity in the way that the advertising's happening, the different people that are on the covers, what are you communicating, right? If you're communicating like a cozy game, usually those are going to have like happier colors and fluffier colors, which maybe if you're intimidated by the gaming space as a kid, maybe you want to play in that space more. If you're an adult new to gaming and you don't want to have to worry about like 8-year-olds 360 no scoping you, like Fortnite stuff going on, like, you know what I mean? So it kind of depends. And I think Fortnite is probably one of the best examples of how to market to people of all ages and all backgrounds, because if you look at their covers, it's just like, it's very bright, it's very open. They have like all these different game modes that you can play. And so there's just kind of like a difference in like, what is your message? What are you trying to sell? And I think that plays a big answer into like how you advertise. But I talked forever.
So first off, when you said cozy game and intimidation in the same sentence, I had flashbacks of when Tom Nook would shake me down on the daily.
Capitalism isn't cozy gaming.
Okay, let's take it off video games for a second, because I would argue, and I could be wrong, right? So I would argue that Magic almost has a different hurdle than say a video game, in the simple sense that there is no, like I said, there's no online chat feature. There's no, like, I'm not in the Magic the Gathering lobby unless I'm maybe at like a tournament per se. So how would you consider Wizards in some degree? How could they kind of police their community in that sense? Because obviously they have some control over tournament control and who's selling their product. but they can't have as stringent controls over, let's say, the four of us sit down to a pod and I'm just the most absolute terrible person to play with.
Which is true, by
There's
the way.
really no one. Yeah, 100%. There's no one you could really report that to other than your self-policing, going like, well, you're out of the group.
Well, in theory, though, right? Like, if you're going
Mhm.
to game nights, it's the same concept, right? Like, it's a game. So, like, if someone's
night?
playing, if someone's playing a game, like, I can't even think, like Fortnite, right, on Xbox, right? Xbox is going to be moderating based on their code of conduct of how people execute, like, whatever terrible conversation they're having with people. But I think, like, in theory, if you're looking at like events that are sanctioned events or things in game stores, like, that's going to fall more onto like the people that are hosting. I think if it's, online spaces, whoever's hosting those online spaces hopefully are moderating things appropriately. But at the same time, if you're looking at it more from like a social concept of like, what can Wizards itself do to kind of make sure that people are encouraging that behavior or like moderating that behavior, it comes from, I think, a couple of things, right? One, you want to lead from example. So if you look at the Neon Dynasty set, they brought in like experts. If you look at the Lost Caverns of Exelon set, they brought in experts to help make sure that they were representing people and cultures appropriately. And like authors have that too, where if they're writing a book and they're worried that the topic, like, are they representing maybe a character that has a certain disability correctly? And maybe they'll have someone who's like an expert in that, or someone who has that disability read and go, was this character properly represented? And I think their efforts to go and do that, especially with something like Neon Dynasty, where there was controversy in the previous Kamigawa sets, where it was like, this was not sensitive or well researched. It was just like, we're going to throw all these stereotypes on a card and hope it works out, because they didn't care about, whatever consequences were behind on those kind of things. But I think the fact that as you see the game evolve and raised awareness about like what matters to people that they're trying to represent appropriately shows that they're caring to try to make this space appropriate for the audience that they're trying to reach to. The other piece of it, I would say, is also like within the company, are they still only hiring like, white men that don't care? Are they hiring
It's looking
women?
great for my resume.
Sorry, I'm not like out here to bash all that, but I think historically, like what kind of representation are they having for their content creators? Are they only backing like certain people? Are they looking to broaden the scope of who's involved? Are they, focusing on doing the right research and all of that? And no one's going to be, I think, perfect, especially when they're trying to make that like conscious shift. But I would say if you look at Magic 10 years ago to now, there's a lot more thought processes behind the spaces that they're trying to create. But again, part of it is going to always be like community managed, right? And if you see someone being garbage, hopefully
Mhm.
they're going to be receptive to the fact that you're calling them out for being trash. I would always like to know, hey, if I'm doing something that makes someone feel uncomfortable, that's never my intent. But you do have those people where they don't want to change or they don't want to adapt due to whatever preconceived notions that they have. And that just becomes a spot like, okay, well, if you're going to act like that in a public human place, that's going to impact people, get the hell out. But,
No,
you know,
I treat all my public human spaces like I'm anonymous behind a keyboard.
like a
I
Call of
roll
Duty
up,
lobby.
yeah, talk about poning noobs and
Oh, yeah. But yeah,
um
I
no,
completely
I
agree with
agree.
Ash in that, and the whole it being also community. Like, yes, there is a huge part on the company to want to create those standards for more inclusivity, but also I think that everybody who is immersed in the game should also have carry that responsibility with them to want to have a comfortable play, play experience with everybody that does end up playing. Because I know when I do go to say a command fest where I am playing with strangers and it's not my friends, my direct friends, it's definitely a huge thing that we always want to treat people with respect and are expecting it to, be, a community. And I think that everybody who is immersed in the game should also have carry that responsibility with them to want to have a comfortable play, play experience with everybody that does end up playing. Because I know when I do go to say a command fest where I am playing with strangers and it's not my friends, my direct friends, you know, it's definitely a huge thing that we always want to treat people with respect and are expecting it go the other way as well. So I definitely agree with that.
Yeah, and I would say I think Magic's doing the right thing. Like Wizards doing the right steps on their side. Now this is just my personal opinion. Um because at the end of the day, you know what's morally right and not right. And I would argue if you look at last year, their two like biggest controversies, so to speak, were over diversity issues because one, the whole Aragorn issue, which to me was like a non-issue because I've got bigger fish to fry in my life.
It was an issue how people responded to it, like the magic,
right?
It's parts of the magic.
Yeah, and
do you want to explain it a little bit for the people who might not know?
Sure. So Aragorn, who in the books, I will argue, in Lord of the Rings, the books, Aragorn is somewhat ambiguous as of race. But he was played by a Caucasian man in the famous early 2000s trilogy. Well, they made the artistic direction to make him black, and now I read Lord of the Rings. I never once really had I don't have a horse in that race, right? I read Lord of the Rings. I enjoyed Lord of the Rings from a child's perspective. But some people felt it was disrespectful to the author's original vision, which I don't know if we want to open that can of worms, but from a wizard standpoint, which I will say came with the blessing of the Tolkien estate, who does control the licensing and had final say on the depiction of these characters, they chose to go a more diversity route. Because I believe Legolas also, to a lesser degree, had a ethnicity change, so to speak, I guess, for lack of a better phrasing. And some people in the Magic space were not as thrilled by it, and those people received my blocking at a very, copious amount.
You were so nice about it.
Yeah.
Like I think that it's a fantasy world, and the parallel that I can draw, because obviously I'll never understand to be on the side of things because I am a white woman, but when I saw a queer character represented for the first time, specifically like Last of Us in a video game, I've never felt so seen or connected to a character before. And so what blows my mind is like the people that got mad over something that meant so much to other people for something that was stupid. Like it was like just because this person who's white pictured a white person and had only seen white people represented in media, because if you look at the time that like Lord of the Rings dropped too, like there's a huge issue with just diversity in media in general. And so again, same thing with like women, right? Like the reason why I connected so much to Eowyn's character was because she's a very well written woman character that represents women very well. Like, and so for someone to have a chance to see themselves represented in fantasy that has been predominantly portrayed as white, was such a powerful thing to give to the community of other, fellow fantasy like nerds or even magic nerds out there. And the people that wanted to gatekeep that because in their mind that they thought that person had to be white. And it's like, no, it's a fantasy character. It wasn't ever specified outside of that what that person was supposed to look like. But the fact that we got to see these characters reintroduced in like such an amazing, incredible way that was still true to the art that was Lord of the Rings storytelling, but also make it a space where people could see themselves in a way that they had never been represented before. And I had seen the impact of people sharing their stories of how much that meant to them who were outside of the magic community. They're like, wow, like I cried when I saw like the Aragorn like wedding, like image and how beautiful that was. And I just think like anyone who has an issue with that is racist for one, but two, like check your heckin' biases. Why does that bother you so much? If you're like, if someone heard that and they were angry about that art, like check your biases. Why were you angry about that? Because there's something intrinsically wrong with that. And I think that revolves like a lot of like self-reflection, because like for me, I was joyous. I was so happy because I knew friends of mine that would look at that card and feel the same way that I felt when I saw like a queer character represented for the first time in a way that made me feel seen. And so that should be something that's celebrated and not attacked. And so that's how I feel about that. But anyways,
No, and
yeah,
I think they're moving in the right direction with that,
yeah.
because one of the things, like if you go back 4 or 5 years to some cards, the fact that you're getting more representation from something like that does show growth, in the sense that the example I think of is Alesha, who conquers death, who is in the lore is transgender, identifies as a female.
Trans
Um,
woman, yes.
yeah, as a trans woman, yep. And but the fact of the matter is, like, it's kind of like a frankly a weak breadcrumb that they're like, oh, we wrote it into the lore, and it is meaningful, but it's sad that like that's the representation you get, is sort of like a background into the lore that not everybody really explores, because a vast majority of or players aren't lore based, and there's like, oh look, card with lady on it.
I think the other hard part too is like when you're designing stuff, like how do you not feel like you're
Mhm.
pandering as well? And I think like one of the things, the reason why I love Ellie from Last of Us is because they didn't make that her personality. Because I think like a lot of queer characters, especially when people don't know how to write them, make their whole
Mm.
story that's just like their coming out story, or their only personal like big arc is like the fact that they're gay. But I think Ellie was the first character that I had ever like played or watched or read a book or story about that was like, oh, I didn't know they were even really gay until the end of like the DLC, where they made like that more obvious. And it was just cool to have this like really amazing, well developed character where their whole personality wasn't just, oh, they're gay. And I think
Mm.
like Levi is another character that they did a similar, you know, ability with writing for, where their character arc was the fact that they were essentially redeeming Abby and bringing Abby out of this violent cycle of hatred. It wasn't the fact that they were a trans like boy. And so I think like that is good storytelling and writing. And I think again, if you're trying to add on like diversity, it's really hard because one, it's sensitive like subject, because in a couple of ways, one, you have to brace your community who could be really attached to certain characters where they already think
Mhm.
they have a certain mindset for something. And then you also have to write it in a way that respects like the community that is being represented there. And I think like an interesting comparison too is like Tracer and Blizzard, where um, people were so mad when Blizzard was like, "Yep, she's gay and has a fiance or something, or maybe a wife," and everyone was like, "What? What?" And it's like, I can't have my waifu, and it's like it's a virtual like character. You weren't gonna be dating them anyways.
Tell
You're
that to my
That's
wild.
shrine. Tell that to
I
my
say
shrine.
that's not true. There's an entire industry of body pillows that
Oh,
proves
okay,
otherwise.
you're right. But I don't know. Hopefully that addressed if that was a question or the topic. But
No, sure. And like this is another one. I don't want to delve too deep into this can of worms, because that's a nightmare I don't need to look at the comment section for. Um, but the other 2023 like quote unquote controversy I would get into, and it's not based off of diversity. It's based off of other aspects that we're just not going to get into. But with the ambassador program, I think Magic did a good, smart job as far as picking a diverse group of individuals. And this is hopefully this isn't to pander to you or anything.
yeah, I'm pretty great.
um, but the fact that it's not just like we picked 99 cis white males between the age of 25 and 40, like the fact that you do have different ethnicities, different, you know, genders, different lifestyles, and things like that, and different even mediums that they represent their content on, goes a long way from where Magic was when, you're right, they were drawing big boobies and bikinis, and kind of like going to cons with like the quote unquote booth babes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was literally a commercial.
Mhm.
My niece is like, "What? What is the 90s?" Because she loves going back and watching like 90s commercials just for fun. And
Mhm.
it's always such a weird like trip for me. But obviously, the best commercials were all the Batman ones. So
Yeah,
we
Kevin
remember those.
Conway.
Yeah.
I'm a fan of the one where they pour the goo into those bug molds and then pull out freshly made bugs. Oh yeah.
Yes, I forgot
Yeah,
about those.
flawless every time. It's not deformed in any way.
Yeah, it's perfect. Yes.
I was a fan of those Nerf guns that like apparently I could hit bullseye targets from 3 football fields away with 0 wind, you know.
Yes. Goodness.
So I guess to bring it back kind of full circle here. So we've seen some growth going into 2023 or 2024 now, as I like to stay younger, but I'm not. Um, what to you guys would, I guess, appeal more to having more of a female presence in the space? Because when you still go to events, when you still go to LGSs, when you go to Command Fest, things like that, it's a white man sea. Trust me, it's, you know, you're peering around there going like, no, no, I don't think that's another one.
I mean, I think it kind of goes back to a little bit of what we talked about before, right? Is making that space feel welcoming for everyone. And that's something that takes time, especially if it came from a basis where not everyone feels necessarily welcomed. And also, magic is a very niche like thing. Like if I talk to my coworkers, I'm like, yeah, I do magic content. They're like, oh, you do magic tricks? And I'm like, well, no, but like, yeah, like it's there. So I think like part of it is like as the game gets like more popular, it'll reach a larger audience of people. But especially now that I think the space is doing a good job at, advertising in a way and creating characters and, hopefully encouraging spaces that allow other people to feel safe in it, that'll change. But I will say, like, the first time I wanted to go to my LGS for like a commander night, I was so scared. I remember like talking to my brother. I was like, "Is this going to be like a Call of Duty lobby?" And it's just like you still
And it
do.
was.
Yeah, thankfully not too much. But you do deal with those like microaggressions or people like, especially if you are a woman like playing or female presenting, that people will just assume like you learned because your boyfriend made you a deck and you don't know what you're doing, or like you don't understand like how plays or certain triggers resolved. So like they'll automatically just assume you're not as good. And I've had people like not interact with my board state or interact with me. And you could argue that maybe they're just bad at threat assessment, but it definitely felt like I was just dismissed because they didn't think I was really an issue or a player to take seriously, or even have like certain plays called into question just because it was like I've literally been called like, oh, that was stupid. Like, why are you doing that? And they threw a temper tantrum like a little kid. And I'm just like, I have knowledge in my hand that you like don't. And like sometimes my favorite part too is like explaining how like an interaction is supposed to break down a certain way where like people do take me a bit more seriously. But I think like what ended up for me was like in the spaces where people kind of made me feel like not welcomed. Like I've been to a game store where someone had, it wasn't quite like an hentai mat, but they had a very graphic sexualized play mat. And I'm like, if this is a space where people think like, yeah, I'm going to just bring this into public and share it with the world and everyone wants to look at this while we're playing cards, like, maybe this isn't the game store I want to play at.
To be clear, for the record, I'm straight white male that we've been attacking the whole time, and I don't want to see someone's hentai mat at the LGS. Like, exactly. I'm good.
And regardless, it's a family game, and so I too really resonate with that point, Ash. That we've been to an LGS that's semi-local to where I guess a semi-LGS because the L stands for local. But where somebody played an aggressively, sexualized mat and had like, islands and all of their basic lands were, essentially tainted. And it's a family friendly game. And we had a dad and a son, came up to like watch over our game and were immediately, kind of like turned away and their eyes were assaulted by this dude's board state. And like, how are you supposed to encourage people to come in when, you're gatekeeping them with the your choices and your aesthetic choices in the game, which should be accepting, should try to be as accepting as possible.
Only hypersexualized like piece that I want for my game board and I don't have these yet, is I want those Brian Kibler sleeves where he's like laid out. Just because I
The
feel like
dapper
that's
pose.
exactly that's like iconic memorabilia at this point. But what about you, Erica? Because I know so you've been to a couple Command Fests now. I know one of them you kind of ran into that, to be honest with you. You know, you had a pod where it was yourself, Sharon, and then two individuals that love to over explain to you what every trigger did and what the C and CEDH stood for and the whole nine yards.
Yeah, so that was actually a really interesting game because at that moment we had just all four of us walked into Command Fest. I think you, Corey, and Cole kind of like walked away to go check out some of the cards. And Sharon and I had decided, like, let's go find someone to go play with. And so we did meet up with these two guys who overall were nice, but as soon as we sat down to talk about what kind of decks we were going to play, they were definitely a little bit more on the braggy side, like, oh, I play CEDH, and just kind of going over kind of like their history. And we like to be transparent about what we know. And, you know, we were both newer players at the time too. So we were definitely like, well, we have edited precons and we are newer to the game. So they were off the bat just very like, okay, well, we'll go easy on you, and I'll pick a deck that I'm not going to like totally trample you with or something like that. And just as the game was progressing, um, Sharon and I were really able to hold our own. Like, even though we were newer players at the time, like you said, Ash, we very much so knew our decks. We had played it multiple times. We knew how the triggers stack. We were able to really hold our own space. And it did get to a point where the one particular person who was very braggy was also the person who died first, you know? And they were very salty and kind of rude towards the end of the game. It did not go the way that they were expecting and ended up just kind of like just being rude overall, like not no table manners. He would like he was re-sleeving like a deck as we would play, or he would scroll on his phone and it would be his turn and we would be like, oh, it's your turn, you know, like just completely checked out from the game. And it just seemed like when things didn't go his way, he was already like out of the game, and he could have very easily scooped. Like, that's always an option, you know, that's always an option that people can exercise. You can always scoop if you're just not into it. And so, you know, he stuck around until he died. And as soon as he did, he just like walked away, left his friend, was like, I'm going to go trade cards with, you know, some people, and really did not care very much about, you know, about our game altogether. He kind of just completely disregarded us once he saw that things didn't go the way he wanted it to go.
Yeah. And I want to also like add to it because I know someone would be like, oh, that well, everyone deals with that. It's not just like specific to women, but I think like women, there's a difference because like I've had games where there's just a salty person who's super like upset about stuff. And then I've had it where it was like catered to like, oh, as soon as they found out I was like gay or had a partner, their whole demeanor changed. And it was kind of like how you described that vibe where it started off like real, like, oh, I, you know, play CDH kind of cockiness to like all of a sudden like really cold and don't like pay attention anymore. I was like, okay. And it's not that like, you know, like it's just like a weird social aspect that I think is sometimes hard to explain unless like you're kind of experiencing it, because there is a difference between like, because I've had people who are literally just salty and sweaty and like also just being like, yeah, I'm going to stay on my phone because I'm angry about how this match went, versus like, you know, a whole different vibe check with just, I don't know, again, like the best way I could describe it would be like a microaggression to a certain
Absolutely.
extent. So
Absolutely.
No,
I
because
completely agree.
yeah, and I would say like so to one, just to wrap up that story for you, Erica, I will say the one nice thing though, and this is kind of speaks to where Magic's going, is the very next pod you guys left from there, if I recall, was with V, who was kind of going on her own journey. as far as like a self-identifying journey, and they were having the time of their life. You know, they're like, "It's my first Command Fest, and it's exciting because I'm kind of coming out as the person I really am for the first time in a social setting." And they were on their own too. Like I don't. I mean, maybe they weren't. I don't recall there being a friend group. I think she was just kind of moving from pod to pod doing her thing.
I think she
But
had,
even
yeah, I think she had showed up there by herself, and there were a couple people she had played games with that day that she wanted to reconnect with. So yeah, she was there. She was there, I think, primarily by herself, and she was killing it. She was really great at the game and just very confident, like going up and talking to people and wanting to like see other pods and see what kind of like games were happening around us. And that was really great.
yeah, and I think to have that, like, you go out, you have that experience, and it goes one of two ways, right? If you go in and there's a welcoming, open environment where people, hey, do you want to pull up a seat and have a game and let's have a blast? They're gonna be in the community. Like they're gonna be more ingratiated to come back to the community. They're more likely to go to events, things like that. If they go sit down and the first thing you see is like, oh, hello, you, and someone's cold shoulder, or they give you the microaggressions, or they roll out their hentai mats, which, you know, now that I know I got to put mine away. um,
Into the fireplace, Cory. Just go ahead and burn those.
Into the fireplace.
here I was trying to get those ones that where like they've got the wrist cushion for my mouse guard.
Oh God.
Not that I knew this is where this conversation was going to go.
Yeah.
But I would say it even extends, you know, like you were saying, Ashley, extends out to the promoters and the event coordinators too, because the first time Cole and I went to a Command Fest, we were looking at a deck for Erika, and Cole's looking at precons, and the guy, with the best of intentions, I'm sure, you know, I don't want to impose anything on the guy, but with the best of intentions, I'm sure, he was like, well, you should try like Azusa, because that's what I built for my girlfriend, and if you have Azusa, a bunch of lands, and like only 4 or 5 cards they have to remember with their tiny little female brains, they'll learn the game easier.
The concept that he had said was it was Azusa with 99 lands, and then over time, you know, as she's playing, she would find cards that she wants to swap one of her 99 lands out of for. And I think that, yeah, like you said, it's just kind of like underestimating, you know, somebody's ability to like interpret a game which is, you know, beloved by it's the rules are, you know, it's a complicated game, but it's not that complicated. And so I'm glad we kind of made the choice that we did, because I think that connection with, you know, with Faldorn was a key part of being like Princess Mononoke, and kind of having this like a basis that Erika was super, you know, interested in, like another media, like you know, anime and that sort of thing that we're already very familiar with. It gave kind of an easier entryway point. Kind of like what they're doing with like Universes Beyond and all, you know, all that sort of stuff that is able to expand the pool of Magic players, you know, wider by bringing people who might not know about Magic but really like Fortnite or Lord of the Rings, or you know, any of the upcoming sets like the Transformers, or you know, and it's all like we were kind of talking about earlier. It's all about bringing people in, because I want more worthy opponents to strike down with my blatantly overpowered decks. So, you know, the more the merrier.
I also think it's important to note too, is like before it was brought up, like how does the company regulate it? But I also think it's largely on the community as well, because like the company can't like hire, you know, security guards to hover over everyone's shoulder and slap them on the wrist every time they say something bad. Like
That's
it's
not true.
like
That's
you
not
have to
true.
check
They
each
could
other.
They could have Pinkertons at every event. And they
Oh
could
my
slap every single one of them.
um, but like that's kind of the thought process, right? Is like, and that's how it is for any community that wants to establish like a healthy space for people, and that's something that gets like difficult to do. And it doesn't necessarily, like, I've had certain interactions where I was just like, "Hey, buddy, like you said this earlier. Did you think about the words and what those kind of mean together?" And
Do
they're
you
like,
like
"What?"
throw
And
them in timeout?
it was just more of like explaining, like, if you're like, wow, for like to them they're like, wow, I'm actually scared, like you're one of the few like women players I'm scared to play against, and in their mind maybe they thought that was a compliment, but it's kind of creating like this air of like you're not like the other girls, or like other women aren't capable of getting to like certain like skill levels, or that you just are automatically dismissing them. So like when someone says like, a statement like that, in their mind, they think it's like a compliment, but it's kind of like explaining like, well, when you say that, you're actually kind of showing that you have other problems behind it. Like, why do you think like other women aren't like something to worry about when you're as an opponent? Like, why do you not respect other women that you're playing with? And it's just like, how do you have that in a discussion if it's someone that you feel like spending your energy to explain like why, like things are going on? But I think an important part as an active ally in any community, right? Like if you're helping out with like Pride Fests or whatever, and someone, even your grandpa or your dad, says something that's kind of like off putting or something that's not like, it's not out there necessarily as like, oh, they're going to get canceled on Twitter in 2 seconds, but it's kind of like oh, you said something that's kind of like close to homophobic or comes from like a place that is ignorant and not necessarily in like an in your face way. I think it's important to kind of like gauge those situations and be like, is it an educational moment? Because the people who are impacted by those statements we're exhausted. Like having to explain over and over again, like why that's bad. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I don't know what happened because I didn't even lose my my internet. I'll cut it. Let's go.
It's good. But I was just thinking of, the summary of that is essentially just like to be an active ally and to say that like you want more women in your space, or you want more queer people, or people in the like BIPOC community or whatever. If you want more people and more diversity in your spaces, you have to be an active ally. And I think an active ally isn't just sitting on the sidelines being like, pat you on the back, I brought you to the game store and everyone's bullying you, but I'm not going to do anything about it because I don't want to feel uncomfortable. And it's like, well, no, like you can make efforts of like, hey, that playmat you have there is wild. Why did you bring that? Whatever, like politely way you want to like say it, but like, or wow, you're impressive for a women player. And then if you're a man, you can be like, that's a wild thing to say to somebody. Did you even think about the ramifications of what you're saying behind stuff? Or like whatever way feels like the way that you want to broach the subject. But I think there's a space, and we don't even have to have it where other women are in the room, right? If you're in a room and there's only men, like you can check people if they're starting to do like talk like, oh, I think women are bad at magic. And you can be like, bro, what the hell? Like, why do you feel that way? And, like that, I think that's like where those conversations are some of the most important to have. And I always say that too, is like, if you're not ready to have those conversations with friends or even family, like who are you going to have those conversations with? Because yelling at people on Twitter isn't going to solve that issue. It's just going to make them not listen to you. So if you have the energy and you feel like this person is someone that you can like course correct to a certain extent, it goes a long way as someone who wants to help improve a community to like take that effort. Because again, for the people it impacts, we're exhausted just dealing with that stuff on a daily basis. It gets even more exhausting having to take time out of our day to explain like, to that person why it's bad to say those things or something like that,
Yeah, and I think that's a valid point too, because you're right. A lot of times, the people that those conversations tend to fall on for worse, really, not even for better or for worse, but just for worse, are the people in the affected community. Like, oh, how come minorities don't speak up more about their rights? How come women aren't talking in the magic space more about the issues they're having in these events? They are, but when you look at the fact that they're being silenced by the majority of non-women players, then you need to have those allies that show up, step up to the plate and go, hey, this isn't all right. And if they are your friend, your relative, something like that, pull them aside and be like, hey, this is not okay. Now, if it is some rando on Twitter, I may block and mute them. Maybe don't waste your energy on that rando. But if it's somebody that you want to welcome back into the space, like, listen, when Cole and I are off having our sexist, racist rants, we got to check ourselves and go, bro.
He's talking about a different Cole. He's talking about a different
I guess too, if I'm okay to share a story too,
Sure.
I'll just say like trigger warning just in case, because it was a story from when I was in the military. But it's just like I was 19 and the only woman in my specific like platoon, and at the time one of 3 in my entire company. And a company can range from like 100 to 200 people depending on the size of your unit and all those shenanigans. But basically, not a lot of other people around, and I don't think I saw my first like woman officer, who's typically someone who's like higher up ranking, until I was in ROTC, and then later went to like another base like for a major training thing. Like it was like, whoa, there's other representation out there. And so again, kind of bringing back to this point of a sense of like isolation, was I had a 50-year-old man, and again I'm 19, and another guy in his like early 30s that were actively like hitting on me. I didn't feel safe to be alone. I didn't have anyone in like the bunks, like my little barrack space, to be with me as like a quote battle buddy is what we'd call it. So if someone like wanted to sneak into the barracks in the middle of the night, I was by myself. I had nobody. So that meant like if I forgot to lock the door after working a 16-hour, shift or anything like that, like who knows what could happen. And so when you're kind of like forced into spaces like that where, you want to speak up about how you just don't feel safe, or you don't feel like people are there looking out for you because you're on your own. I had literally tried to tell my NCO, like, hey, this is happening. Like, these guys are making me feel uncomfortable. And he was like, oh, yeah, that guy's lonely. He's gone through a divorce. And I'm just, oh, yeah, that guy there, he's just weird. Just ignore him. And I'm like, you have the power to do something to help me, like, do anything, and you chose to do nothing. And thankfully, nothing harmful came out of that for me, other than a lot of mental stress and being super paranoid. But like that's kind of like a more extreme example, right? Of like being in those kind of spaces where if you have the power to do something and help, you could potentially be protecting someone from serious harm. And even if it's as simple as being like, stop being an asshole, you know what I mean?
Sure.
And I think like too, a lot of women already carry kind of like those sort of traumas around, not necessarily like because of military experience, but just existing as a woman as a whole, and just society that, if we're trying to go into a space to like play a game, the last thing we want to have to worry about is that continued kind of stereotypes and biases of microaggressions or people doubting our intelligence, because this is a game that we're also here to like enjoy, and we already have to like with everything else in the world. So it's just nice to have like a moment to escape into a game that, everyone else is trying to escape into. So I just think like, yeah, that's like an important thing, is like be an active ally and support people if you have the power to.
No, and I mean, first off, obviously, I'm sorry that situation you were put in. I came from a military family myself. Both my parents served for 20 years, and I'm first off, I'm well aware that in the military, a lot of those things are underreported as it is. So it's very frustrating that, like, to hear that when you did take active steps to report it, that falls on deaf ears, which unfortunately then continues that cycle of it doesn't get reported because, you had maybe you had somebody else in the barracks that saw you make those attempts to report it, and they went, well, I'm not going to bother because she got shut down, and then, when you are looking at something outside of that in a magic space or an entertainment space, at the end of the day, you're going to these events to have fun, right? Because it's a hobby. It's not when I say I'm not talking about you specifically,
Yeah.
but your job is not to, play magic. Like, it's not work. It should be a fun time hobby that you're spending time with your friends or other people and having that gathering experience. And there already is social stigmas attached to like women traveling to events alone, or it's a group of women in a male dominated space. So it is frustrating that would come out, right? It's frustrating that there aren't those allies that would maybe walk up and go, hey, you're a complete stranger to me, but I see that someone is not using the best language at you at the table, or they're behaving in a way that's not acceptable, and either calling them out on it, or even sitting down next to you and asking if you're okay. You know, because sometimes it's as simple as just checking in on the person. It doesn't have to be a big scene. Like, you have to go grab the other person and drag them off from the table and beat them in an alleyway. It can be as simple as, check in on the person, or if you're at one of these events, their staff. I mean, if you're not aggressive or combative, I guess, for lack of a better phrase, to go in and address it yourself, you can go find staff and tell them, hey, I'm witnessing this. This isn't all right. Can somebody please step in, or can somebody please go talk to this individual, because that behavior is not acceptable and it shouldn't be acceptable going forward. And the more times that happens where someone is not addressing that, all you're doing is you're allowing that person to go to future events and behave that way because they found it acceptable behavior. And unfortunately, what happens is it starts as a microaggression and then it becomes a larger and larger thing because they get away with more and more and more, and they keep pushing the line further and further and further. And it's not okay. So you have to be able to prune those things out. Um, I mean, and speaking for myself, there are people in my play group that I do not play with anymore because I sat down and I was like, listen, I just don't like the way they are at the game table. Like, I'm here to have fun, and seeing the way they interact with other people on a social level is not for me. And I've sat down with people for one single game and gone, nope, I'm done. I'm done here. I watched the way you behaved with your girlfriend, with your significant other. We're done. I don't need to talk to you anymore.
Yeah.
Now I'm gonna expose myself a little bit, and I'm gonna seek a little bit of advice here, because this is something I'm guilty of. Now, it's not necessary. Okay, I'm trying to defend myself a little bit, but I'll say it may it may not necessarily be from a sexism standpoint. Now, I have this bad habit of, I taught my wife how to play Magic. She's been playing for 2-3 years at this point. She's admittedly a better player than I am, but I still run into this rut of, like, maybe it's because I still see her as a new player, even though she's not. Of kind of like explaining board states a little too much. Like, hey, this is a great combo, blah blah blah. So I'm trying to find this balance of, I don't want to come off like an a-hole, because I don't know if it's necessarily because it's a female standpoint, if it's necessarily because I still view her as a newer player, or if it's this case that I build all of her decks, so I'm kind of like bragging a little bit about, look, I found this cool card interaction. But I know that sometimes it rubs her maybe the wrong way of, like, I know what my deck does, I play my deck, stop like mansplaining it to me. So I was wondering if in Erika, Cole, you can chime in too. You can mansplain to me how to stop mansplaining to other people.
So is this happening mid game, or is this happening like on the side as like the week progresses and you're like, oh, I was thinking about this card the other day and it has really cool synergies with this? Like,
So usually, okay, I'll tell you this. Don't do it mid game when it's a public setting. Like, if it's like 4 people in a normal pod, if it's like her and I doing one-on-one and she plays something, I would go, oh, hey, I would have sequenced it like this instead because of X, Y, and Z. And I think sometimes she wants to do more of like the trial and error, like, well, I want to do it this way, and if I mess up, then I learn later. Or sometimes I go, well, I would have sequenced it like this, and she goes, well, I sequenced it this way because I know what's in my hand and you don't, which is all valid points.
yeah, so I know when Cole and I first started doing, or when he started teaching me how to play Magic, there was a little bit of an era of, we are just learning how to play the game, and we actually played with both of our hands revealed. And he actually would walk me through what he thinks would be like the most optimal gameplay, and that helped me see synergies between cards. And then we progressed from that to being like, okay, now we're going to play with hands not revealed. And he would kind of let me make my own mistakes. And then after the fact, I would, we would kind of have a conversation about it. It wasn't a very serious game of I want to play or I want to win. It was always a very educational, like, we're playing against each other, but we're also playing together so that we can make sure that I'm gathering as much information as to what the best play is here for what I have. And so I think definitely letting her make her own mistakes is the way to go, but then open up the conversation and just say, well, what did you have in your hand? Or what were you thinking about? And maybe not taking the game so competitively at that moment when you know you might have an opinion on either how to like help her be more efficient with her cards, or if maybe you necessarily are not she's like you said, she might have knowledge that you don't have. And so kind of seeing her point of view and being like, okay, well then show me your cards and show me what it was that you wanted to do. I know there's been moments where Cole's like, why don't you just do this, this, and this? And I'm like, because I have these cards and this is what I'm thinking about doing. This is my train of thought, and this is kind of the path that I'm trying to take. And he'll be like, he'll see the picture and say, oh, I see what you mean. Go ahead and do that. That's way better than what I was thinking. Or, oh, actually, we can go this route and maybe combine both point of views, you know? So it could, I don't know. I could see it being more so on the side of like viewing her as a newer player, but not necessarily um like just kind of having games where it's not about the competition. It's about learning more about the game and learning how to synergize with the cards you do have.
Thank you for raising your hand.
Yeah, I was like, I don't want to cut off anyone. So my partner, or fiance now too, Olive is not a fan of Magic, and I think like for her, it's just she just doesn't like the game. But she'll still play it with me, and she's actually a very, very good Magic player, which is what's so funny about how she doesn't like the game. But part of like when we were learning was after she understood the concept of like this is a mana like cost, and this is how you match like the color cost to like cast that spell, and this is the difference between like sorcery and blah blah blah. Like once she got just like the fundamentals down, we would play, and I would be like, hey, I'm not going to tell you like what to do and what decisions to make. If you get lost or you don't know what decisions to make, ask me and I'll come look at your hand and we'll look at it and I'll tell you what different cards do and then explain what I would do. But like if there's something else that she wanted to do and that sounded right to her in that moment, then she could do that. And kind of making it a spot of more of like, this is how the game works, or this is how like some synergies could work, or this is how that card has worked. Oh, because there's a period here, it actually doesn't resolve that way. And you're going, what the heck? A period and a comma makes a difference. You know, like those kind of interactions where you make it more about like empowering someone to learn how to make those mistakes and those decisions where, okay, like sometimes we'll play a game where she casts like a creature spell and then follows it up with a different one. I'm like, you know, if you want to keep it how you just ordered it, I'll go for it. I just want to let you know that if I was playing it, this is probably how I would sequence it, but I also don't know what's in your hand. So if that makes sense for you, then do it that way. And she'll like pause and be like, oh, I didn't see that because I didn't realize this text here. Or being like, no, I think this makes sense for me. And you go, okay. And I think when you leave it in like a mode of like educational in the sense of like, you know, if you're confused, ask me. If you don't care, go with it, because sometimes you just want to let people like learn the way that they feel most comfortable with. And some people want that kind of like, no, sit down with me and like tell me how you would do it and I'm going to copy that. And other people want to be like, no, I'm going to like misread my own card, mess up. I'm not going to take that play back and I'll just learn from my mistakes because I'll remember this frustration moment and I'll learn from that. Because that's how I learn too, is like some friends will be like, oh, you can take that back if you want. And I'm like, nope, I'm purposely not going to because I want to remember this stupid thing that I did. So just kind of spaces like that. I don't know if that was helpful at all, but
No, it is. I think that's a good point as far as like not necessarily going like you should do it A to Z in this order, but kind of explaining out, you know, here's how these interactions work. You know, like here's the tools now. Excuse me while I anime, push up my glasses, and go. Actually, as you play all your cards,
because you know, maybe we're wrong. Maybe we're actually not smart enough to see the big brain play that the new player sees because we're so biased in our old gamer ways of how we think the sequencing should work that a new card dropped and it blew our mind and we had no idea that you could get even more value from a play that the new player saw. Like, you know, fresh eyes on
That is
certain perspectives.
100% not true, because I've been on MTG Twitter and they've solved everything. There's no ambiguity. They know how every card works. And then if they don't know, Reddit will know. And then it gets to
Exactly.
another rabbit hole. Cole, you got any hot takes for me?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important to like kind of how Erica was, talking about when we were playing 1v1 games. It's a little bit more, casual experience. Like there's not that there's really ever any stakes in a casual Commander game at an LGS too, but as when we're in that moment where you're just like looking at a hand of cards, like everybody has those, like you're in the tank, you're like, I have so many options, it's hard to, compile the perfect play. So I think it's, patience is just, key, just like letting somebody think it out on their own, because there's something different about like seeing the combination of cards in your hand and like, I found this awesome combo, or like it's crazy that these cards interacted in that way. Or I played an Avenger of Zendikar and then I cultivated, and you're like, yes, that, finding those like exciting moments is like, that's what gets people hooked into Magic. And so, being patient and letting somebody figure it out rather than like forcing them along, or being like, okay, like I'm going to verbally assess your game state to kind of rush the clock. Like if somebody's taking a super long time to play, you can kind of, casually, let them know like, hey, low key, the clock's been ticking for 20 minutes now. But I think it's patience is key, like with newer players, and patience is key with like somebody who's playing with a deck who, that they haven't played before. Or, you just have to like assume that your opponent, the fellow warriors at your table, like know how to wield their weapons and sling their spells, and not underestimate anybody. Like, because as we've been talking about, you never know what's in someone's hand.
I also want to add that, and I'm sure you guys do this, but after you play a game with a pod, just going over it and talking about your thought process and just saying like, oh, I think I really messed up at this part because I did this card, or I should have played this instead, or being like, oh, that was really great when I did this, and then it ended up working out late game because this happened, and just like walking through the games. And if we still have time for like a super short tangent, there's like one synergy card that I was like blown away by. We had just come back from Command Fest, and I was talking to Cole, and it was actually one of the first games that I played with Ken EDH, and he was playing his Rocco deck, and I was playing my Faldorn deck, so exile decks all around, amazing. And I have this card in that deck, Sereth the Viper's Fang, which allows you to pay 1 mana to untap another mana card or a creature. And at the time, I had played a Spinerock Knoll, which is really great because it's a hideaway card. And so at the time, I would have had, or I thought about it afterwards, but I almost would have had enough mana to tap Sereth the Viper's Fang, to untap the Spinerock Knoll, to then crack it as soon as I played it because it comes in tap. And the whole time I was just thinking like, wow, this is such a game changer for me, because I was like, I'm always playing the Spinerock Knoll and the Mosswort Bridge, and it always comes in tap. And every time I think that I can go activate it, it's tapped. And this is such an amazing way to be able to play it and then instantaneously almost kind of like be able to do it all in the same turn. And I would not have noticed that synergy had I not been talking to Cole about it on the way back from Command Fest.
That's a cool moment too, because like you also sat there and you're like, I realized this interaction. It feels so good.
Yes, it definitely felt like leveling up,
Yeah, like you're understanding like the game like to a different level. I love that.
Yes.
Okay, so hey, so I think that's going to bring us up to question of the week, card of the week, and then we're going to go ahead and wrap up today's episode. Erica, you brought up Ken EDH. Ash, I don't know if you've ever heard of this guy. He's about 7'6". He's got the body type of Sasquatch.
He's Canadian.
He's Canadian.
Which was funny when I met him for the first time in person, because I'm 5'2", and I didn't know he was so tall.
I'm 5'2" as well.
So he and I are the same height, more or less. And the first time I met him, I said, I didn't realize you're so tall.
All of his friends just saying that as soon as they see him. That's funny.
Now I don't know if you guys are fighting or something because when he was on, I asked you for a question of the week, and your question was like a one sentence question, and he has written what I assume is like someone's doctoral thesis.
Personality differences.
Yeah. So Ken's question, and it comes with sub questions, so brace yourself. Ash, as a woman in a predominantly male space, how can a corporation like Wizards of the Coast incentivize female and or non-binary creators to join the space? Sub point one. Do you think it's the responsibility of the company or the MTG community to foster a safe and accepting space for all people? Sub point two. Please provide us examples in which you have fostered a safe space for your community. So he asked you two questions and he said, show us your work.
Yes. Good thing I'm great at interviews. So we kind of touched on the subject a little bit earlier, right? Is like a big part is what kind of space is being encouraged by the people who make the game. Like, what are they doing to foster an environment that makes people feel safe? And so, again, going back to like representation in the game, code of conduct that's supported at tournaments and game stores and all that kind of stuff. Especially with a game like this, it's going to eventually be an in-person kind of self-moderating thing. It's going to be important for, a local game store to understand if there's a problematic player at a game store. How do you resolve that issue? Do you ban them? Do you educate them? But again, it's also like up to the community itself to look out for each other. Like, how do you, and I think like the other piece earlier was we were talking about maybe calling out direct incidences, which might be pretty low, at least from my experience. I haven't had like a ton of people being awful to me. Like most of the YouTube comments I get are people saying that my voice is weird, but like I haven't had anyone like directly harassing me in like comments about like, being a woman necessarily. But I think
I mean,
like
Cole and I can up the ante if you'd like. If you need that count brought up,
Once again, he's talking about a different Cole.
But I think like another way to possibly look at it too is like how else can the community look out for each other? And it's not necessarily just like, checking each other's behavior, but if someone is building their platform or has a platform already established, how can they do that to help empower other people who are content creators in that space who may not have like those opportunities or maybe have to work twice as hard to get noticed because like someone else is being pushed to the forefront. And if they have, like a giant following for Commander, invite like people who are different than you onto that to help build up their basis and get their exposure going. And I think one thing that I really appreciate is like Queen of Cardboard or Beth is always like talking about other women and building up other women. And you really see like when people are building each other up, but especially like other women that are like building each other up, like not making it feel like only like one person can sit at the table, but you're mentoring people, you're answering questions for people who are interested in that space or maybe already are in that space and they want to, feel safe or maybe accepted in like whatever kind of content creator space that they would like to be a part of. And so building each other up is super important. And again, part of that's just through being positive. Like, okay, this channel has 100 like subscribers, but like I know they're good people and they're trying really hard and they deserve recognition and I support them. So I'm going to like retweet a video they did or comment or subscribe or invite them onto like whatever content piece I have. And I think for at least maybe hopefully what I've done in the community is create a space where people feel safe to talk to me, to approach, to get games in. I've had a lot of different people come on as guests for, Good Clean Commander. Like we had an all women pod, and that was really exciting for me because I had never been a pod with like all women before. But I think it's just really important that like either on camera to create a space that people feel comfortable being in with you. So, calling out negative behavior, or just being open with your own experiences, or just being really sincere and genuine so people feel like, oh, I can be safe around this person. And yeah, look out for each other. We're a community. Build each other up. And I think that applies like not even just in the magic space. Like I wouldn't have had a couple of promotions in my workplace if it weren't for like women specifically stepping out of their way to be like, we're mentoring you. Like, hey, you need to learn SQL for this promotion. I'm going to sit with you for an hour once a week and we're going to whiteboard SQL problems until you really understand how queries work. And I wouldn't have gotten my promotion if it wasn't for the fact that this person wanted to help me succeed. And I think that's how you help, everyone. Look out for each other, take care of each other. So
Now, for the record, when Ken was on here, your question was, "What's the flight speed of an unburdened swallow?" So this is the question she gives Ken, and Ken gives her like, "Hey, by the way, I wrote my own telenovela. Please, recite it and give me your opinion on film." So remember this when he comes back.
You can't put this on me because you didn't tell me what your topic was. You just said, give me a you said, give me a question about anything.
To be fair, I said the same thing to Ken, and he responded with, "Is this the woman episode?"
So he had insider knowledge that I didn't.
He did, yeah. All right, I'll give him that.
It was like a question about anything. What's a funny movie quote?
I'm gonna so I'll pile on there for one quick second, because there's one thing on here that I don't think you covered. So he asked if you could provide examples about how you fostered a safe space in your community. Now, you talk a big game about other creators and stuff like that, but I think this is going to be an opportunity we throw it back on you, because you're talking a game about other people, and he said, "What did you do?" So,
Sure, I
Ken,
said that.
so
By having
no,
the
no, no.
appropriate people on. Yes.
No. So I'm gonna throw this on you. So the whole fact that we're having this episode, I would put at your feet, and
Mhm.
I'll tell you why. So we were initially gonna have this episode previously, and there were some scheduling conflicts and things just didn't work out the way necessarily envisioned. And I reached out to you yourself, and was like, "Hey, I'm so sorry. I don't think it's necessarily going to happen." And like, better luck next time, for lack of a better phrasing of it. Now, I'm not gonna say you twisted my arm or anything, but you made a point that kind of resonated with me about being an active ally. So it's easy to talk a big game, I think, a lot of times, about like, "Oh, I so fully support LGBT rights," or "I fully support that women should have equal pay," or any of these kind of social matters. But when it's easy to say those things when your skin's not on the line, so to speak, or you don't have to step up to the plate and tell other people. Like, I could have easily sat in the background and gone, "Hey, I think there should be more women involvement in Magic the Gathering. That's beautiful. Maybe I send a tweet about it and I, mute the replies." But what you did is you went out and not necessarily recruited someone, but you encouraged someone to speak out that maybe necessarily wouldn't have. Like, I wanted to set up this episode, but I could have easily walked away from it. But I would give you credit that your encouragement and the fact that you were active in helping me be active. And that in a way around is how you're benefiting the community, right? Because you're fostering other people to be allies, and you're fostering them to kind of step up when it matters. And to that, I'll give full credit to you.
Oh, thank you. I was like, did you want me to provide a resume?
I didn't wrap that up with a nice bow at all.
I just wanted you to feel like with that was like you didn't feel like you have to like literally pass off the mantle of like the microphone to someone else to like lead an episode, because I think like a big part of having difficult discussions is being able to learn how to navigate them yourself. And so I think it takes a lot of courage and strength to just be able to be like, yeah, I'm going to have a difficult discussion on a platform that is going to be like public, but also has like my brand associated to it. So like being
Oh,
willing
it's
to
not much
take
of a
those
brand, don't you
steps.
worry.
Well, still, like you're putting yourself out there. So like that's a really big step. But I also wanted to like encourage it because it felt like something you were really passionate about. So I think like, you know, helping each other, going back to like wanting to build each other up and give each other strength to like make the space that we want it to be is like super important. So
Yeah. Cole, Erica, you didn't get a chance to chime in. What are your listen? Cole or Ken needs 10 concrete examples.
Well, personally, I do want to, you know, I think this is a great opportunity to talk about like Ash and Ash's channel, eMpTyG, and how, you know, how many awesome creators she's, you know, brought into this, like into the space, and just giving the, you know, opportunity to have this conversation with us tonight was awesome. And thank you so much for, you know, giving us this time. But Ash, if you want to, you know, talk a little bit about your channel, or, you know, get a chance to get a good plug in there. I mean, you'd make a lot of like brawl content, a lot of awesome like arena content, and like you mentioned earlier, the Good Clean Commander are some very fun videos of like great paced gameplay that isn't, you know, going to be a 5-minute game, and it's, you know, you get awesome plays in there with a ton of fun people. So I think you are a huge advocate of the community and getting people involved. And it's awesome, and I'm super glad that we get the chance to you know, sit here and steal you away for, you know, an hour and a half.
oh gosh, thank you. I'm like, oh, it's compliments. Learn how to accept them. Plugs, I'm bad at that. As said, was, you know, the YouTube stuff. eMpTyG is just like empty, an empty cup, and then G because my brother thought it was a funny pun.
It is.
And then thank you. And then I have started posting stuff on TikTok. So if you're like, I don't want to watch a whole hour of gameplay, well, you can watch like a 5-minute game on TikTok if you want. I do Twitter. Try to limit my Twitter time because, oh my God, negativity in the world. But, you know, so not as responsive on there. Sorry. But at least there's 2 ways you can hang out. And sometimes we stream stuff on Twitch, which actually I just remembered. I have a Commander game that we're doing live for the first time on Friday, which I think is when this episode goes up, right?
Yeah, it'll be today. Yeah.
Today? Oh, today.
Today as of airing, not today as of filming. But yeah, I
Times.
believe it is, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe it's 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time or 6 p.m. Pacific. You can see Ken. I think he's going to be in a bathtub for this episode because it is Good Clean Commander live. So I expect him to be like full rubber ducky, you know, playing the cards. Yeah. But hey, so I guess that leads us into card of the week. Cole, what do you got for card of the week?
Well, okay, so usually we do a cool card. I was gonna go with like Ashling the Pilgrim or Ashcoat, or just, you know, some sort of reference to Ash, but I think we should forego the card of the week this week and instead ask, you know, our guest, like, Ash, what is your favorite commander, or like what is a card that you feel, you know, like the most, you know, like that you resonate with, that brings you joy? Like, what's your favorite card to slam down onto the table?
My favorite card to play, probably Massacre Worm.
Nice.
Best card in Magic.
Yes.
Fibblethip.
I like the pause there that implies that was the hardest hitting question you got in this entire stretch of time.
I had to think about it. It's like asking someone what their favorite movie is. You're like, well, what mood am I in? And I guess today I chose, I don't know, Destruction
violence.
Massacre.
Yeah.
The Massacre Worm.
Nothing's better than when somebody has a board of infinite 1/1s, or like an arbitrarily large number of tokens that they're going to overrun you with, and then you play the worm and take the dub.
Yes, my dream is to do that to a Skewt Swarm army. Just
One day.
one day, indeed.
But hey, I think that brings us to the end of today's episode. I would ask Ash where you could find her, but I think she already sold herself well enough, which, if you didn't hear it, you can find her on eMpTyG. That's eMpTyG Gaming, I believe.
Sounds right.
Okay, sure. That is not to be confused with at eMpTyG, which will direct you to a whole other Magic the Gathering handle. But you can check out Ash. She does all kinds of streaming with some other random guy named Ken who just felt like inserting himself in the podcast. If you want to get a hold of Erika, where can the people find you at?
Yes. So they can find me on Instagram at loveandmana.mtg. We also have a Twitter, also loveandmana.mtg. Those are the two platforms that we are most consistent in. So yeah.
Sure. And you can find Cole at those exact same handles. He in Solidarity will also be in a bathtub on Friday, but his camera will be turned off. So don't go looking for that camera unless you plan on sending me some money. You can also reach out to me. I'm at Sleevecard at all those locations, or you can reach out to the podcast directly at ErcastPod, or you can email us at contact.urcast@gmail.com. It's like I've done this before, where you can send in question of the week, card of the week, all that good stuff. But we're going to go ahead and get on out of here. Have yourselves a magical Friday, and we'll see you next week.
Bye, guys.
Bye.